welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm Jen. I am one of your hosts today. I am joined by my lovely colleague. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jessica. Nice to be here with you.
And we are here today with a fantastic writer and producer of video, a jack of all trades generally. And he's here today to discuss a Star Wars story that we both really loved. So let's get into it. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your story, please?
Hi, my name is Lance Garcia. My story is The Veteran, which is featured in Star Wars from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi.
It is such a lovely little story. And I would love to start out by asking you about your journey to this story. And I'm mainly curious about two things. Your journey as a writer and how you came to this story, but also your journey from Star Wars fan to Star Wars creator.
Well, it's sort of to answer both those at the same time. Like it's a sort of a full circle thing. I really fell in love with reading in general with the book Star Wars, The Glove of Darth Vader, which is not a great story, but it's a post-Return of the Jedi story. It's about beginning of a series, the Jedi Prince series. And I was already a Star Wars fan, but there's this, basically this post-episode episode 6 story with Luke having adventures, and it just ignited the love of reading. And it made me want to write because I'm like, well, I want to do this. I want to add stories to this universe. And for years and years and years, I collected Star Wars books, just hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of books, filling my parents' house still. That if I ever get a house, I have to figure out how I'm going to collect them. But I really wanted to write a Star Wars. That's something I just always wanted to do. And I started writing sort of semi-professionally about 2008. A colleague of mine from NYU, his name was Ben Granoff, gave me an opportunity to help with a sort of a comic book short. And I, basically made a trade. Like, I'll help with this if you help draw a comic for me. I adapted my junior film, Nick Agent's Security Guard, which is What If Dirty Harry was the security guard of the Gap, and I had a booth at Comic-Con, at New York Comic-Con. There I met an editor, and they had a list of characters. They liked the story and had a list of characters that they wanted to work with that all were either public domain or like licensed. And there was one called the Green Llama, who is a Buddhist superhero from the 1940s, who my dad collected, so I was very familiar with him. And with the llama, of all the characters enlisted, is like, here's someone I could write from a true place, something that meant something to me, sort of as a gift from my father, something I could sort of say something with. I didn't really realize that I would fall in love with a character, and since then I've written 3 novels, 2 of which have been published because my girlfriend is reading the 3rd one right now. About like 10 or somewhere between 10 to 12, I've lost count, short stories and novellas, including a Sherlock Holmes crossover. All these various different iterations. I sort of was able to grow in small press, in public, and just through a lot of networking, of working with good editors and being a good collaborator, I got more and more writing work, and just grew steadily. And how I got to the Star Wars of it all is to circle back to the Green Llama. I have a colleague, Steele Philippek, who also attended NYU with me, but I didn't become friendly with him, except I met him at the same New York Comic-Con that I got the Green Llama, and I'm just making that connection right now. But he and I have been producing audio dramas for a while, and I worked with the Green Llama Estate. I asked for the license to do audio dramas because there was a radio show back in the 40s. And during the pandemic, when we were all sitting at home, I was lucky enough to still have a day job. I was still able to, pay for everything. I paid my crew. I paid my producers. I paid my talent and editors. And I put together sort of a portfolio piece because I really wanted to do audio dramas. I really wanted to prove that I could do this for professionally. And I've gotten a lot of close calls for other production companies. but it never kind of went through. So I said to my girlfriend, I'm like, look, I'm doing this. It's going to be a lot of money. It's going to be this chance that I'm going to take because I need to prove it. I need to prove that I can do this. She's like, look, the worst thing that comes out of it, you have a portfolio piece. Instead of getting to the company that I wanted to work with, it got noticed by Lucasfilm, so I sort of shot above where I wanted to. They had taken notice because I was posting it online. They were impressed enough. At the same time, I had become friendly with a editor at Del Rey. Her name is Elizabeth Schaefer. She's been very supportive of my career for years. And when it came time to put together this anthology, I was apparently on Lucasfilm's and Del Rey's list of authors they wanted to work with. And that is the most succinct version of that story I can give.
That is so cool. I have to say, I love everything about it. And I love that it has like a family connection to, and a connection to like a family fandom. That's just awesome. Um, so as far as this story goes, Dexter Jettster is a great character, but not necessarily an obvious choice for a point of view story. I want to know what drew you to him and what was sort of the inception point of your story.
So this is going to make Jen laugh. It was Patrick Willem's fault. And I'll have to tell the story for the rest of my life, which I know he will hold over me forever. But basically, Patrick Willems is a YouTuber who I've become very friendly with. We have sort of this ongoing sort of narrative that we sort of play with on social media that like he and I aren't actually friends, and I'm sort of like this weird stalker guy, which now saying it out loud sounds like I'm just a weird stalker guy. But he and I sort of like make fun of each other on Twitter or whatever. And he had posted something along the lines of a Dexter Jettster, a Star Wars story, when it was a retweet of another of another post. And I was gonna write something basically along the lines of like, ew, like, but Patrick, you hate Star Wars, or something stupid like that. And instead what happened was, and this is one of those things that is always interesting about the creative process and why I'm always enamored by it. It just lit up things in my brain. And I was just like, well, what happened to him after Attack of the Clones? What happened to him in the original trilogy? We didn't have these things defined. And I really wanted to, it's just sort of like, oh, what's going on? And then I was like, I knew there was a possibility that I might be included in Return of the Jedi. There was like sort of like an inkling that it might happen. Even like when I first came up with the idea, but I'm like, even if it doesn't happen, this is an idea. This is a story idea that I want, and I'm going to use it. If I don't say anything, I'm just going to hold it in. And over the course of like 2 years, when he first tweeted that in like 2020, to when I was invited to contribute to this anthology, a lot of things happened both in the world and in my own personal life that sort of incubated the idea and made it a little bit more meaningful and to me personally. And so when the opportunity came, they're like, basically you get this email, do you want to write a Star Wars, which is the coolest email you'll ever get. And I say this every time, but like, I'm so glad I was kneeling down, like cleaning out the bottom of my sink when I got it, because I would have fallen over. So we were so they basically say like, you can give us a character and a story, or just a character, you figure out the story later. Note that like most of the Ewoks and Jabba's palace are taken. And I already had this sort of idea incubating into my mind, but the idea of Dexter Jettster on Coruscant, and while everyone's celebrating, he's the one who's like, it's not over. Because I cite them as a lot as well, but like Claudia Gray's short story in the first, from a certain point of view, with Qui-Gon, Master and Apprentice, and then there's the Chuck Wendig's Aftermath series, which had Jar Jar post episode 6. I love the mixing and matching of eras. Like I like seeing different people and like, well, how does it affect them? And I thought there was just a lot from a sort of a ground level that you can explore with a character like Dexter. And the idea of guilt, and the idea of like, he blames himself for everything, because from his point of view, it's this thing led to this thing, and now the Jedi are gone. Now it's all kind of like, but now everything that this mistake he made, this great victory has come through, but he's not able to celebrate it with the people that he wants to celebrate it with. And that's an emotion that I have felt plenty of times, including during this whole process. There's so many things that have happened over the last few years that I wish my dad was around to see, because he wouldn't shut up about this. Like, he would just go on and on and on. But so I felt like with Dexter, there was just so many more storytelling opportunities that could speak to a very real place in the Star Wars galaxy.
Yeah, he's really a perfect choice because he has a distinct personality that like you kind of grok right away, but there's lots of questions unanswered. He doesn't have a lot of backgrounds. There's a lot of like room to play. And just for the audience, I did laugh when you said that. I was on mute, but so you couldn't hear. Because that is like a really great origin. I love that. I love when like sort of jokey or, you know, sort of tossed off ideas become like real things and labors of love. That's a really beautiful thing. And speaking of lovely things, as you were just saying, this story walks this really beautiful line, I think, between despair and hope, because as you said, Dexter is very cynical and probably traumatized for sure. And that's being contrasted with this sort of like, you know, like the joy of the victorious rebels and this sort of like general celebratory atmosphere, this like kind of rose-colored glasses point of view of everybody around him. So how, and like the end, without giving it away, I think honors both of those things, you know, like it kind of validates both. So how, when you are writing and crafting the story, how do you walk that line between two very divergent moods, if that makes sense?
Well, I think a big part of it, I felt like I knew where I wanted him to end up. I knew that like this is Star Wars, hope is very important. I really wanted to help. I wanted him to find it. And I think that's it was a challenge, because it's like, how do you get to that point that doesn't feel cheap? How do you get to that point that feels like a natural progression of where he was at the beginning and where he ends up? You know, there's a bit of like where you take into account actual canon, where you start thinking like, well, we know the part of it is like this meta text of like, well, you know, it's going to get bad. The audience knows it's going to get bad, but he doesn't necessarily know that, but he knows what he's seen enough to like have like an inkling of where it could go. So that's where the despair comes from. Like, and I think, you know, now that I'm in my 40s, it's sort of like I've lived long enough to sort of see so many points in my life. I mean, Jen, you and I, we went to NYU together. There's so many things we saw on a day-to-day basis during that period of that our 4 years there, like radical shifts in terms of our lives, where things look like they're going to get better and they looks like going to get so much worse. And then you kind of find out like it never goes the way that you think it's going to go. But there is always that sort of lingering sort of, you know, maybe this time. And I think that's kind of where I dip into this sense of the world's on fire. The world's on fire every day. Like, how do we keep up? I mean, we can look at this now, like, how do we keep up with all the news, the things that are going on, and not feel that sense of despair? But we always find that one story, that one connection, that one moment that says like, maybe it's going to be okay, you know. And it's, how do you hug the line? It's the sort of hug line that we do every single day when we wake up. But in this story specifically, it was about trying to find, you know, he is seeing this and he wants to grasp for it. Like Dexter wants to grasp onto the hope. That's, I think, like, yes, he is despairing. Yes, he's cynical. But I think the reason why he makes the choice he makes at the end, without like getting into spoilers, is because he has been looking for that reminder that yes, you should keep on fighting. It's a motif that's explored over and over again in Star Wars. Some of my favorite Star Wars films like revisit that idea. I mean, the first movie is called A New Hope. So that's where you have to go to. There you have to start some way dark to find your way there.
Yeah, that I have to say, like, was one of the things that I adored about this story. It was so real. And I like that you kind of came. I mean, first of all, I love that it's called The Veteran, because, you know, when you get whatever it is, like, you get to a certain point of your life where there is some cynicism, and I think there's hope and cynicism, when you think about that, when you think about somebody being a veteran in general, and knowing sort of what is going to happen, from our point of view, I suppose. I loved it. The next thing I want to know is, so what sources did you consult when you were writing this story? Did you need to kind of familiarize yourself with different parts of Star Wars? How did that work?
So I reached out to Alex Damon of Star Wars Explained, who, if you don't know, has a really, him and his wife Molly have a really great Star Wars YouTube channel. And I basically was like, hey, what story should I read about Dexter Jester? And he read between the lines. And he recommended Brotherhood by Mike Chen, which I think I'd already read by that point. And then I read he's like, well, Kirsten White's Padawan is How They Meet. And it was already on my list. Like, you have to remember, like, and I'm going to keep on repeating this, like, I'm a fan. Like, this is not just like one of those, like, wow, I got this opportunity to write in the stars. Like, I'm reading this stuff right now. I'm reading Tales of Light and Life as we speak. And I mean, not at this exact moment, obviously, but like, it is the book that I'm currently reading. I adore Star Wars prose. So I was going to read Padawan anyway. There's also a Smuggler's Guide, which I picked up, but it was Padawan specifically that gave me sort of the spine of the narrative. There's basically, the story takes place on Lenara, and that is how Obi-Wan met Dexter Jester, and he's a boy. And I remember very vividly riding the path train from Jersey City to New York, to probably like 33rd Street, and there was the moment when they meet, and the line, a version of the line, which was the boy he had met on Lenara, came to me. And actually, no, I think I actually have a draft of it because I wrote in my notes. Let me bring this up because I think this is actually interesting. I haven't consulted it in a while, and I know I kept it. Let's see. I'm going to do a quick search. Yeah, so the original line was, Dexter Jester thought of the young boy he had met on Lenara and all that the boy would never see. He thought of the old warrior the boy had become and the war that had been lost. They were celebrating outside, a thunderous, jubilant roar that echoed through the chasms of Coruscant. Dex had heard the song before played to a different tune, but familiar all the same. The Empire had fallen. The Galactic Civil War was over. It gets a bit on, but I wrote that on the train after I read Kirsten White's book. And sort of like that, a version of that actually survived all through the edits to the current edition. And then so like I read that. I also tried to read up a lot on what was happening in Return of the Jedi at the time. I consulted. I had already read the Chuck's Aftermath series, but I did a bit of a refresher on Wikipedia. I looked through some of the old West End games because I really wanted to bring some old Legends material into there. I like reading. I love reading the West End games. For those of you who don't know, was a lot, like most of the stuff that we sort of define as like the backstory of Star Wars originated from a role-playing game in the 80s. It came out in 1987. It's the West End games. It's a lot of like Akbar's backstory. A lot of the rules that we kind of associate come from those. I did an interview with Timothy Zahn years ago now, where he's like, well, did they give you any guidelines for Heir to the Empire? Like, yeah, they gave me the West End games, the source book. So I looked at that to sort of understand what Coruscant was like. And what was interesting about doing all this sort of research was I was very careful about learning about as much as I could about Dexter, as that was canon. I sort of ignored some of the Legends material just because it was, they kind of went in a different direction with him. And I read as much as I could and refreshed myself about like what was going on in Return of the Jedi at the time. And when I had picked Dex, I figured like I would have sort of like a blue sky, I could do whatever I want feeling to it. But I found that I kept on hitting up against the boxes of like, well, the diner's destroyed, is gone at this point. This happens, there's a riot that happens in Monument Square. And rather than ignore those, what I have found, the more canon I started taking into account, the better the story became, because it starts to become, it's not just like, well, I have to take this into account. It's more, well, how does he react to this? How does that feel? The diner closing, like, what does that mean? Like, where is he now? Like, why, how, like, it informs so much. So I basically read as much as I could about every single thing about Dex, about Return of the Jedi at that time, the wider canon, what was happening on Coruscant, and then I had to ignore as much as I could and just focus on Dex's point of view. Like, there's a line where he hears about a Jedi destroying the first Death Star, but it's like, well, why would he? Like, I could have written like it's Skywalk, but like, well, why would he know this far from the fighting? In like, he would only get like everything third or second hand. So you start like, I had to narrow everything down to sort of like actively ignore things as I was writing it. So yeah, it was I don't know, it was the best kind of research I've ever had to do. Like, oh no, you got to read a Star Wars. Oh god.
That's great. So this story is but one star in a truly star-studded collection. And then you hit warp drive and those stars stretch out, and then you're but so I'd love to know, there's like a truly, like, it is like a bucket list of writers that you would want to see write Star Wars. So did you have any particular favorites among your colleagues' contributions? Do you have any stories that you'd like to highlight?
I love pointing out the fact, like, the weird trilogy of Mike Chen's Brotherhood and Adam Christopher's Steadfast Soldier is always really interesting. I think it's a really great sort of trio. I like Daniel Page's like extended sort of sequence, like seeing the heroes from another person's eyes. I'm a big fan of Kristen Baver. Kristen and I are very good friends. To the fact that, like, basically we have a text change that's just about cats, my girlfriend and I, and her and DJ Clulo, who runs the Star Wars social media, and his fiance, we just share cat photos. So having, like, and I'll keep on saying this, but like, having to share that experience with Kristen means so much to me, because she is a very dear friend, someone I do talk to like literally every day. She did not tell me that she was in this, and so I know who to tell where I buried the bodies to. But she, so having that with her, God, there's so many. I could go on. Like, this Jason Fry, I have interviewed several times and has always been very kind. Alyssa Wong's story was wonderful. I think that it's easier to me for me to say this. Like, it's just, I look at the list of authors and I'm like, one of these things is not like the other. I feel very. I'm the novice one of this. I mean, I do have a writing career. It is not my day job yet. But I am, like, I feel like I'm the newbie. And I'm the fan who's like, hi, I don't belong here, but I'm so happy to be here. It's so nice to meet all of you. It's really surreal. It's just like, oh god, and Phil Sosak, like, just having it to share the pages with him. It's weird, man. Like, everyone, it's just like, I read again, I would have bought this book. Like, I would have pre-ordered this book years ago, and like, I would have just like been reading it anyway. And then it's like, oh, and then there's my story. And it's like, what's going on? So it's yeah, I think, yeah, it's oh god, I forgot who wrote the Wicked story. My brain is blanking out, but I thought that was such a clever use of, like, how do you make the Ewok show canon, and Charlie Jane Anders' Sarlacc story. Yeah, they're all just a blast. Yeah, it's again, the fact that I'm like in this, I'm like, are you sure? You're sure, right? Like, because I read How to Win the Time War. Like, that's a good book. Like, that's a good book. Like, I've written not good, I've written fine, like, but like, that's a book. Okay, but sure. Yeah, so it's I hope that, yeah, it's been a lot, dude. It's been a lot. I'm just still freaking out about this.
I mean, it's so much fun to, like, not like, like, talk to somebody who just really, I mean, loves Star Wars and really, it's, I guess it's kind of a dream of everybody who's a fan of, in a fandom, to really be able to not just like contribute to it, but also, work with other really good writers, their own contributions, their own. It's just so cool. And you're just infectious. Your enthusiasm is infectious. I love it.
And, to build on that for a second, I think that, like, as you were talking, it occurred to me that, like, I think one of the things that people love about Star Wars is that, like, it depicts this, like, really beautiful, like, sort of chosen family, found family ensemble. And it seems like that spirit kind of exists among, like, the fans and the writers as well.
Yeah, it's every single Star Wars author I've met has been incredibly kind and supportive. Like, I'll always lead with Cavan Scott, who I met years and years and years ago at San Diego Comic-Con. And I knew him because I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, and I listen to Big Finish audio dramas because I'm that kind of nerd. And I was like, "You're Cavan Scott." And like, I asked him, like, "How did you write for Big Finish?" And he understood the question. Like, how can I write for Big Finish? And he's been so supportive this entire time. Lydia Kang's been wonderful. Mike Chen. I've already mentioned Adam Christopher. All of the High Republic authors have been just lovely. So you get the sense of like everyone's Claudia Gray, Delia Dawson. I've already mentioned Chuck a couple of times. He's been wonderful. Like Kevin Hearn. These are all just authors I've met who are just like, they're just so happy to be there. And I think it's not like it's the cool kids club. It's very much this, AV club. We're all like, we're just so happy to be here. Like, we get to enjoy this together. And like, isn't it weird? It's kind of weird. And it's just from like little career advice that they've given me to just being like enthusiastic. It's I don't know, the nicest people you'll meet are Star Wars authors, I think. At least that's been my experience. So yeah, they're wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing this lovely story with us and with the world. It was really lovely to talk to you.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Trust me, when I got the invite, I'm like, of course I'm coming on. It's Jen Jordan. What are you talking about?
Yay! Oh, so exciting. Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Listeners, you're going to want to check out The Veteran in Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view. It is a lovely story, and it is accompanied by dozens of other really lovely stories too. And I think you'll enjoy all of them. Thank you so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.